The gate of Chinedu's compound banged shut behind Amara, and the sound travelled across Umuokoro like a slap across a quiet face. She did not turn back. One small bag was pressed against her chest, and inside it was everything 11 years of marriage had left her. 2 wrappers, a comb, a tin of ointment, and the waist beads her mother tied on her the morning she was given away. Evening fires smoked in front of the houses, and the smell of roasted cocoyam followed her down the path. Near the stream, the wooden gong sounded twice, the way it does when news runs from compound to compound faster than any leg can carry it. By the time she reached the second bend, the whole village already knew. Mama Ngbeke stopped pounding her pepper and stood in her doorway. The men under the old udala tree lowered their voices. Children chasing a rubber ball stopped. Everybody looked. Nobody moved. That is the way of a village. It sees everything, and sometimes it says nothing. Amara kept walking. Her eyes were dry, and that frightened her more than tears. A woman cries when she is wounded, but when the wound goes too deep, the body forgets crying and only remembers how to walk. Behind her stood the compound she built with her own 2 hands. She carried the sand for that wall. She planted the ugu on that fence. She fed the man who had just told her, before his own kinsman, that she was no longer welcome under his roof. Under the tree, an elder called Ozo Emena opened his mouth and closed it again. Even wisdom sometimes waits too long. Darkness was gathering. Her father's village was 2 hours away on foot, with nothing but bush between. And bush at night belongs to snakes and to men with bad thoughts. Then a voice called her name. Amara. She turned. A lantern was coming toward her, and behind it walked a woman wrapped in lace from the big city market. Gold shone at her ears. A small girl walked ahead, sweeping the light along the ground. Neka, the richest trader in Umuokoro, the woman who paid school fees for other people's children. My sister, Neka said softly. Where are you going at this hour? Amara's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Neka took the bag from her hands. You will not sleep in the bush like an animal. Come to my house, eat, rest. Tomorrow is another day, and God is not asleep. Somebody clapped. Then another person clapped. The story reached the compounds before the 2 women reached the junction. Did you hear? Nanika has taken Amara into her home. Only a person with compassion helps another woman in her darkest hour. They said it at the fires that night, at the stream next morning, and they would keep saying it for many market days. And Amara, tired to her bones, followed the lantern through a red gate she had never passed, ate what she was given, thanked the woman who saved her, and slept the deep sleep of somebody who has finally stopped running. But sleep is only a curtain. It hides the room. It does not empty it. Long after midnight, when the lamps had died and even the dogs were quiet, the small gate behind Neka's compound opened without a single sound. A man walked in. He did not knock. He did not ask for direction. He walked like a person who had walked that path many, many times. And if Amara had opened her eyes in that moment, she would have known those footsteps anywhere on this earth. They belonged to her husband. Now tell me, you who are listening, if you woke up in a stranger's compound and heard footsteps you recognized, would you jump up and open that door? Or would you lie still and pretend to be sleeping? Put your answer in the comments.
Hi viewers, has somebody ever opened their door to you when you had nowhere else to sleep? Type that person's name in the comments and tell us the town you are watching from.
11 harmatans before that night, Amara stood knee-deep in cold water at midnight, digging a channel with her bare hands. Rain had fallen without warning, and the stream had climbed into their yam farm. If the water stayed till morning, the seed yams would rot, and if the seed yams rotted, there would be no year. Across the ridge, Chinedu swung his hoe, his lantern hanging on a stick, the light shaking in the wind. "Go home!" he shouted through the rain. "Go and sleep." "And leave you here?" she shouted back. "So people will say Chinedu's wife was sleeping while his farm died." He stopped. Even in that darkness, she saw his teeth when he laughed. They worked until the first cock crowed. When the water finally ran off and the ridges stood again, Chinedu took her muddy hands, held them the way a man holds something holy, and said, "Amara, whatever this ground gives me, half of it belongs to you." She kept that sentence. Women keep such sentences. They fold them and hide them inside the chest and bring them out on hard days. Their beginning was small. One room, a leaking roof, a mat, a lantern, and 2 people who were not afraid of mourning. She fried akara before cockcrow and sold it at the junction. He carried other men's yams for small money. Every coin went into a tin under the bed, and when the tin filled up, they bought cement, 1 bag at a time, until a wall stood where grass had been. When his mother's legs failed, it was Amara who bathed the old woman for 2 years and lifted her at night. When his father died, Amara sold her own wrapper to complete the burial money. The village saw, the village remembered, for a while. Only one thing refused to come. Season followed season, and no child ever cried inside that compound. His people began to count the years out loud. Aunties arrived with roots, with advice, with questions that cut like broken bottle. Amara knelt everywhere a woman can kneel, and in those days, Chinedu would put his hand on her shoulder and say, "God's time is best. Let them talk." Then the ground he had been begging finally answered him. He borrowed, planted 3 farms in 1 season, and the rain agreed with him. He bought a lorry and began carrying yams to the city himself. Zinc replaced thatch. Small boys ran to collect his bag. Elders greeted him before he greeted them. And that is where the change entered. A cracked pot does not empty in 1 day. It empties drop by drop, while everybody is still admiring the water inside. First, he stopped eating her food. He had eaten in town, he said. Then he stopped saying where he was going. Then, when she asked one question about the lorry money, he looked at her the way a man looks at a child who has interrupted elders. "Woman," he said, "what do you know?" The husband who once shouted her name across a flooded farm could no longer remember to greet her in the morning. The village noticed. The village kept quiet. And silence, when it stands beside cruelty long enough, begins to look like agreement. He started traveling. 2 days, 3 days, 1 whole market week. And each time Chinedu came home, Amara saw something on his face she could not explain. Not guilt, not tiredness. Peace. The settled peace of a man who believes he has found something better than what is waiting at home. Then one evening he walked in carrying something else on his shirt. A perfume that no stall in Umuokoro market had ever sold. On the biggest market day of the Harmattan, a widow named Ihuoma was dragged into the open square by 2 men who wanted their money. They had seized her only goat. They shouted loud so the whole market would hear her shame, and the crowd gathered the way crowds gather, to watch, not to help. Then a hand touched the shoulder of the taller man. "How much?" The square went quiet. Neka stood there in lace and gold. She counted the money into the man's palm in front of everybody, ordered the goat returned, then lifted Ihuoma up with her own hands and dusted the woman's knees herself. "Nobody kneels in front of me," she said. "Stand up. You are somebody's mother." That was Neka. That is why, whenever her name entered a conversation, voices became soft. She was the first woman in Umuokoro to own 2 lorries. Palm oil, tomatoes, rice from the north. Her goods moved on roads that swallowed stronger traders. Her husband, Nuwabueze, died on the Onitsha Road when she was 29. and no child had come before he went. So she built a compound with a big red gate in front and a small gate at the back that only she used. The village saw her lorries. The village never saw her nights. It began 2 harmatans before Amara suspected anything. Chinedu came into her yard to beg for credit. 100 tubers to fill his lorry. She gave him. He paid back before the day he promised. A trader remembers such a man. Then he began to bring small things. The first yam of his farm, a gourd of fresh palm wine, nothing anybody could point at and call wrong. And he talked. He told her about a house where nobody laughed anymore, about a marriage that had died long ago, though nobody had buried it. He never once called Amara a wicked woman. He was cleverer than that. He simply painted a lonely man carrying a heavy load alone, and let her hands come to help him carry it. A person who wants to steal from you rarely announces himself as a thief. He first shows you a wound, then asks you to hold the bandage. And Neka told herself her own story, the way we all do when we want something the conscience is refusing us. She told herself she had taken nothing. What is already broken cannot break a second time. And a woman who buried her husband at 29 had suffered enough to deserve a little warmth. But deep inside, in that quiet place where a person cannot lie to herself, she knew. That is why the back gate was oiled until it opened without singing. That is why Egodi, the young girl who served her, was warned never to pass behind the storehouse after dark. That is why 1 cup was always washed twice and returned to the shelf upside down. In the market, Neka carried herself like a woman with nothing to hide. At home, she lived like a woman guarding a door. Then came a night in the middle of Harmattan, when dust made the moon look brown, and Chinedu sat on her low stool and said he was tired of climbing a wall to enter his own happiness. Neka's voice was careful. "And your wife?" For a long moment he said nothing. The lantern hissed. Outside, a night bird called twice and stopped. Then Chinedu smiled the smile of a man who had already finished thinking. "Before the new yam festival," he said, "there will be nobody standing between us." Neka believed he meant he would face the elders and send Amara home with honor and her share. She did not ask him what he actually planned. And so 3 lives began walking toward one morning, and the person who would bleed most was not the one the village would ever have guessed. The soup was still boiling on the fire when Chinedu called Amara into the parlor and told her to sit down. 4 men were already sitting there. His uncle Dimba, 2 cousins, a friend from the next village who had no business in that room. Cola lay on the table, broken. Nobody had waited for her before breaking it. Amara sat on the edge of the chair with her hands folded, and the smell of her own soup drifted in through the door. "This marriage has become a burden," Chinedu began. He did not shout. That was the worst part. A shouting man is angry. A calm man has been rehearsing. He counted her crimes one by one, the way a trader counts loss. 11 years and no child in the compound. A lorry that broke down on the Enugu road. His mother's long sickness. Every misfortune that had ever entered that gate, he laid on the head of the woman who swept that gate every morning. "And now," he said, "you question me. You watch my movements. You have changed, Amara. You no longer bring peace into this house." Something inside her folded quietly. She had not changed. She had only started asking questions. But in this world, a woman who asks questions is quickly called a woman who has changed. She lifted her head. Her voice did not shake. "Who dug the channel with you at midnight when the flood came? Who fried akara at cockcrow so this compound could buy its first bag of cement? Who washed your mother for 2 years while your sisters were sending greetings from the city? Chinedu, look at me, call my name, and tell me I have changed." He did not look at her. Old Dimba shifted on his seat. "Chindu," he said, "this thing you are doing." "Uncle." Chindu raised one hand, and the old man's words died in his mouth, and with them died the last chance that anybody in that room would stand for her. Then Chindu said it. "Go back to your father's house. You are no longer my wife." He clapped once, and a cousin stood up and brought a bag out of the corridor. Her bag, already packed, already tied. And that was when the true weight landed on her chest. Not the words, the bag. Somebody had folded her wrappers, gathered her comb, and knotted that rope hours before she was called into the parlor. The judgment had been delivered long before the case was heard. She stood up slowly, the way a person stands when the ground can no longer be trusted. She did not beg. She did not throw herself on the floor. Her mother told her once, as a small girl, that a cracked calabash can still carry water if you hold it correctly. She walked out into the yard. The clouds hung low, holding a rain they refused to release. Harmattan dust sat on the leaves. The yugu she planted climbed the fence, fat and green, ready to be plucked by hands that were not hers. At the gate, she paused for one breath. Behind her, the goats were still calling, and her soup was still boiling, and it would boil until it burned, because nobody in that house had ever learned when to take a pot down. Then she stepped onto the path. The neighbors came to their doorways. Not one of them said, "Amara, come and rest in my house." Not one said, "Chinedu, wait, let us talk." They folded their arms and gave her the greeting this world gives a falling woman. Silence. The sun went down, and the bush began its night noises. There was no moon that evening. Then, out of that darkness, a voice called her name. She stopped. She knew that voice. Everybody in Umuokoro knew that voice. It belonged to the last person on this earth she expected to meet on that road. The water in the basin was warm, and Aneka knelt on the floor with her own hands and washed the dust off Amara's feet. "Sister, no," Amara whispered, pulling her leg back. "You cannot kneel for me. Tonight I am not a trader," Neka said. "Tonight I am only a woman." By the second market day, women were telling that story at the stream, as if they had witnessed it themselves. Neka gave Amara a room with a real bed. She gave her 2 new wrappers. She sent Igodi with hot food when Amara had no appetite. When Amara sat staring at the wall, Neka would sit beside her and say, "A river that is blocked does not die. It only finds another road." Chinedu should be ashamed, people said. A stranger has done what his own family refused. And here we must be honest with one another. People judge kindness by what the eye can see, because the eye is lazy and the heart is far away. A person can pour warm water on your feet in the evening and still be standing on your grave by morning. Amara did not know that. What she knew was gratitude, and gratitude that heavy becomes a kind of debt. She began waking before Egodi to sweep the compound. She washed plates nobody asked her to wash. She thanked Neka so often that even Neka started looking away when she said it. Then the small things began. A cough in the night, deep, dry, ending in a small clearing of the throat, the exact way a certain man had coughed beside her for 11 years. Red mud on the back path in the morning, not the brown sand of that compound, the red mud that only comes from the farms on the riverside. A back gate oiled so well that it opened without a whisper, in a house where every other hinge sang. And Egodi, that girl carried her tray past the corridor at night, with her eyes fixed straight ahead, like somebody who had been warned that looking sideways could cost her the job. Then came the wrapper. Amara was folding linen in the storeroom when her hand touched something deep blue with silver thread running through it. She knew that cloth. She knew every thread of that cloth. Chindu had bought it for her 3 harmatans ago at the city market, and 1 month later he told her, with a straight face, that thieves had entered the house and taken it. Her fingers began to shake. Then she folded it, laid it back exactly where it had been lying, and walked out of that room. Because grief plays games with the mind, she told herself she was becoming bitter. She told herself that a woman who has been thrown away starts seeing enemies inside shadows. She told herself many things that night, lying on that soft bed in that kind woman's house. But the heart is a fast animal. The heart usually knows the truth long before the mind agrees to hear it. She could not sleep. The night dragged. And just before cockcrow, when the darkness is thickest and the whole world holds its breath, she rose to fetch water. She stepped into the corridor barefoot. At the far end, under the last door, a thin line of lamplight was burning, and behind that closed door, 2 voices were speaking softly, the careful, low voices of people who have practiced being quiet. One of them was Aneka's. The other one belonged to the man whose food she had cooked for 11 years. Amara did not open that door. She stood in that dark corridor with her bare feet on the cold floor, counting her own breathing, and listened until the lamplight under the door went out. Then she walked back to her room, lay down, and stared at the ceiling until the first cock crowed. A hunter who shouts inside the bush goes home with an empty bag. That morning, she greeted Neka with a smile she had to build with her own 2 hands. She ate, she swept, she said thank you. And from that day, Amara became a woman with 2 faces, one for the compound and one she kept locked inside her chest. She began to count. Under her mat, she kept a small tin, and every night the back gate opened without singing, she dropped 1 palm kernel inside it. 7 kernels in 1 market week, then 9. Then the tin could no longer hold them. She watched the red mud on the back path. She noticed which cup was washed twice. She saw how Egodi's hand shook when the girl passed that corridor. Then, one afternoon, Neka travelled to the city with both lorries, and Amara offered to clean the storeroom. That room is only dust, Neka had said, laughing. You are my visitor, not my servant. Let me be useful, Amara answered. Idle hands carry a heavy head. Egodi went to the stream. The compound was quiet. Amara moved the sacks of rice, and behind them, under an old raffia mat, she found a metal box. It was not locked. A man who believes nobody is watching soon stops using keys. Inside that box, there was no gold, no money. Only papers and a black exercise book with a soft cover, the kind children carry to school. Amara could read small. Her mother kept her in school until primary 6, until the money finished. She turned the pages slowly, and what she saw put her down on the floor. Names. Page after page of names from Umuokoro, each one with an amount written beside it. Money collected for a big yam contract in the city. Plenty supply, plenty profit. Payment after the new yam festival. Men who had sold goats. Women who had emptied their market money. 43 names. And there, on the 9th page, in that same handwriting, Ihuoma, the widow. The small money that woman had left after her goat was saved. She had put it into Chinedu's hand. Amara's chest tightened as if somebody was pressing it. Then she reached the papers under the book. One was a loan agreement, and the security written on it was 2 lorries that did not belong to Chinedu. Another was a receipt from a man in the city with a name she did not know, Idahosa, for money already collected. And the last paper carried a thumbprint. Her thumbprint. A woman knows her own thumb the way a mother knows her own child's cry. It sat there in dried blue ink on a land agreement beside her name, written by a hand that was not hers. She had pressed her thumb on a paper only once in her whole life. Chindu had brought it to her one evening 2 harmattans before and said, "It is for the fertilizer people. They want the wife's thumb too." She had laughed and pressed it. She had even asked whether she should wash her hand first. The room began to move around her. She carried the paper to the window and read the land description one word at a time. The boundary, the stream on one side, the ogbono tree at the corner. And her hands went cold. Because that land did not belong to Chinedu's father. That land was not inside his family's portion at all. She knew that stream, she knew that ogbono tree. She had climbed it as a child. Before the first cock crowed, Amara wrapped those papers inside the deep blue wrapper with silver thread and walked out of that compound without waking anybody. She did not go to the square to shout. She did not go to Chinedu's gate to fight. She went to the oldest man in Umuokoro. Ozoemena was already sitting outside with his snuff, the way old men sit when sleep has stopped visiting them. He watched her kneel in the sand at his feet. "Papa," she said, "I am not here about my marriage. Let my marriage die. I am here about something bigger than me." She opened the wrapper. The old man took that exercise book with both hands. He held it far from his eyes and read the names slowly, moving his lips, and Amara watched his face change 3 times before he reached the 5th page. He did not shout either. He blew his snuff into the sand and said one thing only, "Go and sit inside. You will not return to that woman's house today." By evening, the wooden gong sounded 4 times, the call that gathers the kindred. And that is when Umuokoro began to remember. Dimba remembered that his nephew once asked him to put his mark on a paper he never read. The palm wine tapper remembered seeing Chinedu at the boundary with 2 strangers and a measuring rope, early, before the village woke. Mamanbeke remembered that her son gave Chinedu money for that yam contract and had been too ashamed to tell anybody. One by one, they remembered. A village always knows. It only keeps the knowing in small pieces, and everybody hides his own piece under his mat, until the day somebody carries all the pieces and drops them on the table. Word crossed to Neka's compound before the meeting finished. Her name was inside nothing. Her hand had signed nothing, but her 2 lorries were sitting inside a loan agreement she had never seen, and by morning the market had opened its mouth. The same women who used to soften their voices when they said her name were now saying it another way. They said her lorries are inside it. So all that kindness, na soebi. She kept the wife in her own house, en? She kept the wife inside her house. Neka went to her shop that morning and sat behind her table, and for the first time in 9 years, nobody came to greet her. That is the price of a name built on what people can see. The same mouths that build it can sweep it away before the day breaks. At the kindred meeting, the elders read every page aloud. Names were called, men stood, and confirmed their money. 43 names became 61. The figure grew until the youngest man in the room could not fit it on the wall. Then Ozoemena lifted his hand and the compound went silent. He raised the last paper, the one carrying the thumbprint. "This land," he said, "the land this man sold to a stranger from the city, it does not belong to his father. It never belonged to his father." He turned and looked at Amara for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice shook like a man carrying something too heavy for his age. "Your father, Egbunam, stood before this kindred, before he died. That portion by the stream, the one with the ogbono tree, he did not give it to any husband, he gave it to his daughter." Chinedu walked into the square that morning, wearing new lace, and the face of a man who still believed he could talk his way out of anything. He greeted the elders. He smiled at the young men. He sat down and crossed his legs. Then the entrance opened, and 2 things came in, that he had not planned for. The first was a stranger in a clean white shirt, Ida Hosa, the buyer from the city, a folder under his arm and his driver behind him. The second was a crowd of villagers, carrying nothing except the memory of what they had given. Ida Hosa opened his folder and read out the land, the boundary, the price he had paid in full, and the date he paid it. Then he asked one question that opened a hole in the ground under Chinedu's feet. Who else has been paid for this same land? 4 men from the next village raised their hands. One land sold 3 times. The square made a noise like a market when rain begins to fall. Selling one ground to 3 different mouths is not ordinary greed. That is a man setting fire inside his own kindred. The exercise book was read again, name by name, and each person stood as their name was called. Ihuoma stood holding her wrapper with both hands, and when the amount beside her name was read, the whole square groaned like one person. Chinedu started with the words that had carried him all his life. Business is business. The city people cheated him. The rain failed. The lorry broke down. He would pay everybody, only give him till the new yam festival. Nobody clapped. Nobody nodded. That silence was heavier than any beating. Then his friends began to move. Not shouting, moving. One man stood to fetch water and never came back. Another suddenly remembered a farm he had to visit. By the time the sun stood in the middle of the sky, the bench beside Chinedu was empty, and even Dimba had turned his back and was facing the elders. That is how it goes. When a tree is standing, everybody rests inside its shade. The day it falls, everybody arrives with an axe. Neka was called. She came without her gold. She placed her lorry papers on the mat and knelt, not for the elders, but for her own foolishness. And there, in front of the whole village, she learned what many learn too late, that the man who called her his happiness had been quietly using her name as a rope to tie other people's money. He told me his marriage was already dead, she said. He told me he would face the elders and do the proper thing. He never told me he had sold anybody's land. She looked at him once across that mat. Chinedu did not raise his eyes. Then a voice at the back asked, "Where is the wife?" And the whole square turned. Amara stood up. 61 people had lost money. A woman had lost her name. A man had lost everything he stole. Every eye in Umuokoro waited for the wounded woman to finally open her mouth and pour fire on all of them. What she said next made even the elders lean forward. "I have not come here to bury anybody," Amara said. The square did not understand her. A young man at the back shouted that the police should carry Chinedu away that same day. Another shouted that the Umwada should strip Neka in the open market, the way they handle women who spoil homes. Amara raised one hand, and the shouting died. "If you carry him away today," she said, "who will pay Ihuoma? A man inside a cell cannot farm. Let him work. Let every yam from that ground go to the people whose money is inside that book, until the last name is paid. And let the land my father left me return to my name, not to a husband, not to a buyer, to me." The elders looked at one another. Ozoemena nodded slowly. Then she turned to the women who were already sharpening their tongues for Naneka. "Leave her lorries alone. Ihuoma sells on those lorries. 12 women carry their goods on them every market day. If you break her, you break them too. Punish the hand that stole. Do not tear up the road that other people are walking on." Somebody hissed. Somebody wept. Neka, still on her knees on that mat, covered her face with both hands. Hear me well. Amara was not being sweet that day. She was being wise. A person who pours kerosene on a burning house because she is angry with the fire will still lose the roof above her own head. Before the kindred, Ozoemena called that boundary aloud, the way it was called the day her father gave it. From that day, the ground carried her name. She collected her land. She collected her dignity. She did not collect revenge, because she had watched what revenge does to the hand that carries it. Do not think her heart was quiet that day. That night, she cried into her wrapper until her chest hurt. The difference is that she cried where nobody could use her tears, and by cockcrow she had washed her face and gone to the stream. That evening, she left Necker's compound with the same small bag she had entered with. She did not curse. She thanked the woman standing at the gate, and both of them knew what that thank you cost. She took a room near the stream and started again. Akara at cockcrow, like the early days, only this time nobody was calling her anybody's wife. By the second harmattan, she was buying palm oil in drums and selling it in small measures. By the fourth, she had a shed with a zinc roof. Then she did something Umuokoro had never seen. She gathered 9 women whose names were inside that black book, and she taught them to keep their own record, in their own exercise book, in their own handwriting. The elders started sending young wives to her. "Go and sit with Amara," they would say. "That one has a head on her shoulders." 9 harmattans passed that way. Then one night, in the middle of a heavy rain, somebody began banging on Amara's gate. She carried her lamp and opened it. And the person kneeling there in the mud, soaked to the bone, was the very last person she ever expected to see at her door again. The woman kneeling in that rain was Necker. The lace was gone, the lorries were gone, sold to settle what her name had been tied to. She had spent 4 years trading in a far market where nobody knew her face, and when her body could no longer carry it, she came back to the only person in this world who owed her nothing. She did not beg. She only said, "I have nowhere to sleep." Amara stood at that gate for a long moment, and every soul in Umuokoro would have understood if she had shut it. Instead, she went inside, put water on the fire, and came back with a basin. Then she knelt down and washed the mud off Necker's feet. "Tonight, I am not a trader," Amara said. "Tonight, I am only a woman." Necker wept, the way a person weeps when they have finally met the thing they can never repay. That is what people never understood about Amara. She did not forget. She simply refused to let another person's wickedness choose who she would become. And Chinedu? There was no thunder for him. Life is rarely that dramatic. He worked. Season after season he bent over another man's ridges under the same sun he once rode past in his lorry, and the yams went to 61 names until that book was finally closed. His hair turned grey early. He lived in one room in a village 2 hours away, and when he passed on a market day, the young ones did not know who he was, and the old ones did not want to remember. He sent a message once, through a small boy, asking for forgiveness. Amara sent back no words. She sent a basket of yams from her own farm with no name on it. Because silence is not always hatred. Sometimes silence is a woman refusing to open a wound that has finally closed. The years turned. The shed by the stream became a mill. Young women came and sat under her roof, and she told them the same thing every time until they could say it in their sleep. Know your own land. Read your own paper. Never press your thumb on what your eyes have not seen. And when kindness comes too fast, do not run from it. Only watch it. Then came an evening like any other evening. Fires smoking in front of the houses, the gong sounding twice near the stream, roasted cocoyam on the air. And on that same path where Amara once walked with a small bag pressed against her chest, a young woman called Nkemjika came walking, carrying a bundle and the face of somebody whose home had just closed its gate. The village watched from the doorways, the way villages do. But this time a lantern came down that road, and this time the woman holding it had nothing to hide. "My daughter," Amara said, "you will not sleep in the bush. Come, eat, rest. Tomorrow is another day, and God is not asleep." A person can lose a husband, a home, a name, and everything the eye can count. But nobody on this earth can take a heart that has chosen dignity. And that is where we leave Umuokoro tonight. But the road did not end with Amara. Nkemjika arrived at that gate carrying her own story, and what happened inside her husband's compound 3 nights before that evening is a tale that will make you hold your chest. That one is coming next on this channel. If Amara's strength touched you, tap subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that story does not pass you by. And before you go, tell us in the comments, was Amara right to open her gate for Nneka on that rainy night, or should she have left her kneeling there? Your answer may be the very word another person needs to read today. Share this story with somebody who needs to hear it.